Welcome to W Report. This is an analytical transformation of an interview. Why does the West keep hiding devastating wars behind moral slogans? From women's rights in Afghanistan to defending democracy in Ukraine, while deliberately sabotaging diplomacy and fueling regime change?
I wanted to add something with regards to the future of Europe because, the current leadership of Europe is now determined to join the war against Russia directly, but they will not be ready, but according to their own judgments, right? They won't be ready to do that until at least 2028, 2029. Which is why they're desperate for the war in Ukraine to continue until then, because it's easier to join an ongoing war than to contrive a brand new one. Because you have to set it up, you have to create justifications, you have to create a pretext. All of this out of whole cloth is difficult to do. So they're desperate for the war in Ukraine to continue until they're ready to join it directly. And now the fact that Ukrainians are not going to be able to hold out until 2029, it seems that they're determined to open a new front in the Balkans. And I've been observing that in the Balkans, we've had increasing tensions in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and increasingly frequent provocations that are happening between Serbs, Croats, and Bosnian Muslims. And so now it appears that this is really taking off. Just a few, I think, about 2 weeks ago, there was a Muslim leader, like a Wahhabi Salafist Muslim leader in Bosnia, who wanted to lead a prayer of 1,000 Muslims to take place in a Croatian village, in a village that is 100% Croatian inhabited. So he wanted to bring 1,000 other Wahhabi Muslims to organize a prayer in this village where they don't live, where they don't belong. And my immediate reaction was, okay, so this must be orchestrated by the British, who are very, very present in Sarajevo, and they're very well connected with through their NGOs and their private contractors and so forth, and they're funding a lot of this stuff. And then somebody looked it up and they said, like, oh no, it looks like the funding from this is coming straight from Serbia. Which, Glenn, it makes no sense whatsoever. There's no reason why the Serbian state, for any reason, would be orchestrating a provocation by Muslims against the Croats. And so I thought that's very strange. But okay, there's British-run NGOs in Serbia as well. So, voila, this is how you can do this. And then very shortly after that, we had an escalation of protests against the Vučić government in Serbia. And then the Serbs investigated and they were like, oh, this is being funded from Croatia. Well, we have a lot of British-funded NGOs in Croatia. And so this is how they do it, like they start to slowly polarize these societies, and then at a given point, you're going to get some kind of an incident that's going to boil over, that's going to inflame the situation to where people are going to reach for the weapons, and you're going to start to have a war. So this is the danger now that, as they're losing Ukraine, they're going to have to open a new war front. The reason why I always say the British is because they are really leading the charge in this. And it was the one of the most powerful London think tanks, which is called RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, have already designated the Balkans as they said, inevitably the second front in West's war against Russia. And now it appears that they're actually doing this. And this will be another calamity for the whole continent of Europe because, you know, it was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 2014, which precipitated World War I. And these same structures of power once more are playing with matches and are looking to push the whole continent into a bloody calamity and a bloody mess, just in order to save themselves, just in order to preserve their own control over the levers of power in society. This is a real danger, and I think that they are doing it as we speak.
Is Bosnia on the verge of a new conflict? Why is the EU, under the guise of peacekeeping, dismantling the Dayton Agreement by pushing for centralization and stripping Republika Srpska of autonomy? Could this become the next flashpoint?
I don't know how I see the conflict unraveling, but I can see the telltale signs that they are trying to provoke a conflict. And what is dismaying about you're very correct that the EU is running Bosnia like it's a colonial possession, and the office that you name, I also forget exact title of it, but the man is running Bosnia like a viceroy. He's an absolutist dictator in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And rather than pacifying the region, they are doing everything to escalate the tensions and to polarize the situation. And that makes it very difficult to predict what might happen, because people are, up until recently, I've heard a lot of Bosnian politicians who say like, oh, no, like there's no chance that there's going to be war here again, because nobody wants war. Nobody wants war. But through history, the orchestrating wars has always been a matter of staging provocations, staging atrocities, where you get a group of, let's say, extremists, violent extremists. You pay them some money, and let's say you get a bunch of extremist Croats. You pay them money and you tell them, go to this Muslim village and slaughter a whole bunch of completely innocent Muslims. And you already have the press there. You make sure that either the perpetrators put everything on video, or you already have, as they've done in the 1990s, you already have CNN or BBC crews there recording the event. And then you immediately push it out to the media to say like, oh my God, look, the Croats are slaughtering the Muslims. And then if that doesn't get the war going, then you repeat and you find a bunch of violent extremists on the Muslim side, and you tell them, okay, go to this Croat village and slaughter a bunch of people. Make sure it's all on video, and it's going to go, and then you get the war going. And this is what was done by the British, who were in charge of, in control of a town called, how do you call it? Ahmici. It was something like the Bucha massacres, and it was supposedly done by the Croats, but as we now know, it was almost certainly perpetrated by the British. And the reason why they did it is because there was an alliance that formed between Croats and the Muslims against the Serbs. And this alliance was starting to prevail over the Serbs, and they were starting to have successful military campaigns, and this was completely derailing the British plans for Bosnia. And so they decided to destroy this alliance, and so they first orchestrated one massacre of Muslims against Croats, which was smaller, and then they orchestrated another massacres by the Croats against Muslims, which was bigger. I would, this may seem incredible, but I was relatively close to this event. I know people who know these events, but for English language readers, I would recommend a book by a British journalist, British author. Her name is Carol Hodge. She wrote a book called Britain in the Balkans from 1991 to present. And so that book is very compelling. It doesn't actually say that the British orchestrated this massacre, because that's not the official narrative, but she provides the official narrative, and then she um, uh, exposes all the inconsistencies in the narrative, which kind of lead you to the obvious conclusion that we know what it is. And so this is something that has been done throughout history for a very, very long time, for whatever reason was necessary. Terror attacks. If you need to go re-engineer the Middle East, well, you're gonna need to bring the Americans in. The Americans don't want to do it, so okay, let's do 9/11. And then, for a different reason, maybe you need a Bucha massacre because you want to derail the peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, and on and on and on and on. This is almost part of the playbook, and we are seeing it now implemented in the Balkans. And how it's going to answer the question, how it's going to go. Well, if it's up to the people, it's going to be diffused. But the people need to be informed correctly, rather than being fed propaganda, lies, obfuscation by the mainstream media. And that's part of what becomes it becomes the burden for every person who understands the situation to try to you know spread the word, because we don't want to go through what we went to in 1914 and in the late 1930s, because again, it could turn out into World War III.
How do brotherly nations turn into enemies overnight? Why is the Balkan tragedy, where neighbors became foes, now replaying in Ukraine? And to what extent has the West fueled this manufactured hostility?
Exactly, and they do it on purpose. I the metaphor that I find most appropriate in this is always that, that big jar full of red ants and black ants. And then if you put, how do they say, if you put 100 red ants and 100 black ants into a jar, and you observe what happens, nothing happens at all. um, the ants just go about their business. They don't care that there's red ants there or the other ones. But if you then take a jar and you shake it up violently, uh, I guess you alarm the ants. They become, something's badly wrong, and then they perceive the other, and then they say, "Oh, it's the other one's fault," and then the ants start killing each other. And I think it's exactly the same thing. Uh, the question of Russian language didn't even exist. People just spoke Russian language. They still spoke Ukrainian, and people got on with their lives until 2014, when the West overthrew the democratically elected government in Kiev and installed a fascist junta. And then their first decree was to ban the Russian language from all official use, and from television and from schools. And so now you started making that an issue, and they kicked off a broad-based campaign of demonizing Russians and Russian speakers in Ukraine. So now you started shaking the jar. You started pointing out, these are the other peoples, and they're bad, and they're dangerous for us, and we have to subjugate them, or else they're a threat to us. And then you spend 8 years um, escalating those tensions and creating hatreds that never existed there. And in former Yugoslavia, I grew up here. We you know we had Catholics, We had Orthodox Christians, the Serbs and Montenegrins. We had Muslims. We had other nationalities living. And it was never a problem until it was made to become a problem. And you can see that happening, and we can see it starting to happen again today. And it's being done deliberately. This is not, later mainstream media in the West, they say like, oh, centuries, all hatreds, who could possibly understand this? These people are, primitive and violent, and they can't help themselves. They just want to kill the other and so on. That's not true at all. That's not even remotely true. It's when you saw psychosis in the population, when you bring them to the verge of an existential crisis, when they are deprived of a future and they don't know how to solve their own problems, and then you start creating this psychosis where you start blaming everything on the other side. So you start telling the Muslims, oh, it's the Serbs that are threatening your future, and you start telling Croats, oh, it's the Muslims. And, by the way, they've already formed an alliance in the Balkans against the Serbs. Croatia, Albania, and Bulgaria have signed a military alliance. And we've never had a military alliance with Albania or with Bulgaria. We have nothing in common with them. There's no reason for us to have a military alliance, except for the fact that Croatia is to the west of Serbia, Albania is to the south of Serbia, and Bulgaria is to the east of Serbia. So we kind of surround Serbia. And then, the Serbs have pretty much a military, some kind of an alliance with Hungary. So this region really is being rigged for demolition.
While the West chants slogans about democracy and women's rights, it lights fires across continents. In Afghanistan, to justify occupation. In Ukraine, to flood the region with weapons and shut down diplomacy. And now, the Balkans. Same script, different war. Create a moral villain. Inflame historic ties. Stage provocations. Ignite chaos. Bosnia is no longer a peace project. It's a colonial zone under EU control. The Dayton Agreement is being dismantled in plain sight. British-backed NGOs fuel tensions, using religion and ethnicity like weapons. Serbs are once again encircled by alliances, just like in the 1990s. And all of it is happening for peace. The West shakes the jar of red and black ants. And as always, by the time people realize they've been manipulated into war, it's already too late. These aren't ancient hatreds. This is engineered madness. Thanks for watching. Support the channel if you find this format valuable. More deep dives are coming soon. Until then, think for yourself and draw your own conclusions.